Hello and welcome to the world as we see it. Particular welcome if this is your first visit, if you're new to us and you haven't seen us before. If you have seen us before and you've visited and you're coming back, then you are particularly welcome too, of course. Welcome back. So, who am I? Who are we? And four gathers has now followed. So that's really good news. Thank you for that, four gathers. You are very welcome too. And I was about to go through the who am I, who are we, what are we doing here? And my name's Lloyd Hobart Mitchell. And I'm an ordinand with the St George's congregation here in Thailand. We're based in Pattaya, which under normal circumstances is a very popular holiday destination. And I am, there's Father David Price, just as I was about to say his name. And Father David Price is the chaplain of St George's, who is overseeing my in context formation whilst I begin, I think in October, starting to study with Sarum College. So that's going to be a 3-year course. So that's who we are and where we are. And in terms of what we do here, actually we kind of tiptoe through various things every day, whatever seems relevant at the time. I end up reading a few bits from a few books and say a little bit about them as we go along. And hopefully we have some comments as we go. So that would be ideal. I'm just going to straighten this screen because I don't feel like I'm in the middle. That's a little bit better. Okay. I don't know why the computer was just at odds. It wasn't sitting square. Anyway, now today we are. Oops! Oh, good lord! Now that is the alarm to say you're late. You're late for Twitch. So there we are. That works because we're already online. We'll have to stop that. We'll have to make it a little bit earlier. Anyway. Today we are going to start by going over to the Church Times and have a look at the headlines of the Church Times, maybe just dipping in to a couple of bits and pieces on the front page. And then we're going to definitely talk about one of the articles in the Church Times, which is called "Liturgy is Not Just a Virtual Experience." So, very relevant for anyone who has got used to the idea of watching church as opposed to attending church. I mean, completely understandable during these lockdown times when we weren't allowed out of our houses. But as things slowly get back to normal, then there is, I suppose, the opportunity for folk to say, oh, but, we've been doing this for a year or two. Let's not bother going. So I don't want to preempt the article, but that's without having read the article, I'm thinking that probably that's the gist of it, and we will talk about that now, okay, or in a moment. Now what we'll do, I'm going to share my screen. There's the sharing page, and we will have a look at, where are you? There we are. So there we are. That should be showing you the Church Times, and it is. So we've got the Church Times, and it's Friday the 13th of August. So that's all good. Now let's go up. The first thing that I want to show you and talk about, of course, is the ghastly shooting which happened today in Plymouth and cost the lives of 5 innocent victims before the gunman turned the gun on himself. I haven't read very much about this story beyond the article in the Church Times, and it's really shocking reading. It's very, very sad, and the whole community there is suffering. So for sure, I really do think everyone needs to include those folk in their prayers this evening. Well, I say this evening, you might be watching somewhere else in the world where it's not evening. You might be watching in America, where it's just morning. Everyone's, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, yes, everyone I think needs to think about those poor people in Plymouth. Berlin remembers the day the wall went up, and the Catholic Archbishop who held a service in Berlin related to the day, to the anniversary 60 years ago, as a Good Friday moment. They will remember the day, as a Good Friday moment, which was very desperately negative for Berlin and for Germany for so many years. Of course, reunification happened, and that's all good. But nevertheless, there are so many scars which were left with those folk whose families were split, whose family members died, all sorts of atrocities which occurred during the years, and of course that's all in living memory. So yes, it's good to remember. ONS figures show a decline in church weddings. So very interesting, this article, talking about the number of folk who get married. Lots of statistics in this article, but effectively only 1 in 5 weddings now occur with a religious ceremony, with a religious wedding. And it says a huge amount about society that something as significant as getting married doesn't happen in a church. I know it's a controversial issue, but I'm going to say it anyway. At the same time, we know that there is part of our community who want to get married in a church, and so it swings and roundabouts, of course. So let's keep an eye on that. That's very interesting, that article. There are a few other bits and pieces, bits about the Olympics, bits about sports, and that was the only thing there, I think, which I wanted to point out. Yes, that's all I wanted to talk about. Now, what we're going to do is nip over now to this article, which talks about the fact that liturgy is not just a virtual experience. Live streaming, if it became the norm, could turn worshippers into spectators rather than participants, says Neil Thompson. For well over a year, clergy and lay people have triumphantly and courageously kept churches in this land open and accessible for worship, while the buildings have been closed or seriously restricted. The opportunities to harness imagination and technology to enable online worship for those at home to share in have been amply realised, and this facility will, I hope, continue to be available, though not at the expense of real visits by real people. Now, it's worth saying, I think it's worth noting, that at St George's congregation we have had a bit of a debate about this over the last 10 days. Because we've now in Thailand got a lockdown. There's a restriction to only allow 5 individuals into the chapel. And pragmatically, there are insufficient folk to do everything that needs to be done, and also keep an eye on the online stream. And so it's a huge debate, because we have people who can't come to church. So the online stream is actually very important for those people, should they want to watch the service online, and should they want to take part. Over the last year or so, less than a year I suppose, but just under a year, we have built up quite a good following online, and we have a few people, certainly one or two every week, who watch from far afield, from around the world. One in particular in Australia, who joins us every week, and so no, they are not in the church, but I feel quite strongly that we owe those people who are now loyal to seeing our stream and participating online to maintaining that. So it's difficult, because there is this thing where to concentrate on the stream interferes with real world worship, and that has got to be the priority. Number one priority is the folk who actually come to church, who actually participate in the Eucharist, who come to participate in communion. And I think it's a really difficult one. It's not difficult, it's very simple in one sense, but it's difficult in terms of the modern world we live in, where there is an expectation for people to be engaging online more. There is an expectation for churches, whatever their size, whatever their struggles, to maintain an online presence. And so, okay, let's carry on, because maybe I've talked enough there. There are warning signals being given, however, that a new church is emerging that will principally be this virtual experience through live streaming on social media platforms. Without wishing to sound like a Luddite, I suggest that this would be more than unfortunate, for it would mean the abandonment of the heart, experience, and meaning of worship, the church as God's gathered people. And agreed, there can be no discussion about that. Churches have had some level of success online, but it's no replacement for church. I suppose it's the same as the debate. I'm sure the debate existed years ago about football spectators in the studio, and those who would watch football at home on TV. Those in the stadium, sorry, not the studio, those in the stadium, the excitement is palpable. Human beings relate to one another, using all of the senses. We're very sensual in terms of, auricular or visual or, tactile animals. That's what we are. And congregating, and the act of fellowship, certainly, and the act of worshipping together as a group, praying together as a group, the act of intercession, it wouldn't be the same if the chapel was empty. The same as you would say with, the recent Olympics. They tried their best. They had other Olympians coming to watch. It wasn't the same. They did their best, but it wasn't the same. And I think the same arguments can apply. So whether we're talking about joining in, participating and encouraging folk on a sports ground, it's the same debate. You need the feeling of being in church with other people. You need the feeling of communing with God on an individual level, whilst other people are doing the same. And despite the fact that I've been instrumental in making St George's have a relatively popular fan page and a relatively engaging stream here, for example. I think there's no fight in terms of there's no debate of what is more valuable. Now, and it's not a but, it's just a reality. There are folk around the world who won't be going to church. There are folk whose only church experience going forwards will be online. And maybe they're vulnerable, maybe they're elderly, maybe transport's an issue, maybe they have other issues like agoraphobia or mental health issues or whatever. And for those folk, I think that the online worship is a good second best. I think it's the least worst if the only other option is no worship at all. So, engaging with a church which you resonate with online it has been a real source of sustenance, I suppose, spiritual sustenance. And certainly I routinely tune in to Canterbury to watch their evensong or the prayers, and very often the dean is there with the cat or the pigs or whatever other stuff is going on around him, and it's really good. So yes, I've kind of got I don't want to say I've got a foot in both camps, because if I was forced to choose, on pain of death, then, well, let's just cancel the online. Doesn't matter. But the whole time that it's, that we don't have to choose, then I think that the online system is worth maintaining. That's my argument. I would love it if only people would comment, if they would come over to Twitch and comment. That would be really good. Now, let's have a read. It says, worship is drama, but it is neither theatre nor cinema per se. It is an encounter in which something happens. It draws us in and takes us where we alone cannot go, into the heart of God, the epicenter of our being and our salvation. This is an experience realized by the Holy Spirit, which is transformative and beyond human control and manipulation. In an age wedded to entertainment, self-promotion, and the consolation of technology, the Christian gospel lies beyond the drama of the theatre and cinema, while also being found in it. Agreed. No one's going to argue. Well, maybe some people will argue. I won't be arguing against that. I agree with him. Merely watching is not worship. And I agree with that. One of the things that we do at St. George's is always provide the order of service for the forthcoming Sunday. We provide links on every Facebook post that we've made, sharing the link to the forthcoming services, order of service. And we actively encourage people to listen to the music, to practice their singing beforehand, to using, and so one of the things that Father David will always do when introducing us to the week, when at the end of the introductory music, Father David will always encourage people to find the links in the Facebook posts and join in. And I think that's really important. So, let's carry on reading. The relationship of the observer to an event and other people is quite different from engagement and presence. At best, online worship involves people at a certain but incomplete level. Agreed. And it is obviously a platform for teaching and exchange. Okay. In the cathedral in which I served, large services would have to utilize the great spaces divided by a stone screen topped by a very large organ. The separation, though physical, often felt much more in terms of distance, involvement and participation? Well, I think it would. I think that would be, if I was stuck on a pew behind a great stone pillar or a huge organ box and I was unable to see what was going on, that would profoundly impair my own worship experience in any kind of church. My position there is, if you're going to be there and engage yourself. And I'm quite a visual person, so for me, not being able to see would be rather difficult. I remember once, many years ago, on a Christmas day, when I was at Canterbury, and I can't remember how it ended up, but instead of being in the in the main seating area, actually I was up the back of the church behind the altar, in the choir section, which is way at the back, and I could hear what was going on, and actually completely, burnt into my mind, even now in the memory, was me looking at the stained glass, because that's all I could see. Beautiful. And in fact, it was a reflection of stained glass. There were these glass panels in front of me, and in the glass panels I could see the distorted reflection of the stained glass behind me. And it was very beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the same experience as being party to the Christmas Day service from the other end of the church, because I couldn't see. So I get that. I completely understand that. And in that sense, I suspect, maybe this is at odds to the chap who's written the article, in that sense, I expect that a person who is engaged online watching a service, so long as they can hear it and see it and participate in it in the way that I've described, they would have a better experience then, I would hope, than a person who's stuck behind a big stone column or something. I was lucky. I had some beautiful reflections of stained glass, but not everyone is that lucky. Now, let's get back. Then there is the question of the fourth wall, the invisible divide between stage and audience, and the very physical presence of the screen in the cinema. At times in church worship, the fourth wall seems to exist, in part so that congregations are merely passive, merely spectators before a stage with players, ministers, choirs, etc. Now, what we have done to try to overcome that is to place the camera, the iPad, within the pews, within the seating area, on the right-hand side. So when you're looking at the altar, you're behind some chairs, and very often people are walking in front. I think at least 2 or 3 times in every transmission, there's people getting up or moving around or doing whatever, in the same way that you would be seated in the church, and the camera is positioned at an eye level as if you were sitting down. So I think we tried. Now, whether we've accomplished that, I don't know, but we tried to diminish the fourth wall. We tried desperately to do that. At the heart of worship, though, lies encounter, communion, union, unity and atonement, and this, of necessity, sees the rending of the veil, the breaking of the fourth wall. It is the surrender of the heart and mind in the midst of God's gathered people. It is here that humankind encounters the divine presence of God, the glory of the Shekinah, in a visceral and all-consuming way. And all I can say is agreed, absolutely agreed with that. There's nothing we can do, really, there's nothing we can do to replace those things. We can't create communion with an online stream. It's not the same. To convince the sceptical of the uniqueness and reality of this Holy Communion, perhaps a slight parallel runs in football. I've just said that and I hadn't read this. That's really funny, isn't it? Where people have to play a game on a pitch with a real ball and a real goal, even if millions will watch a match in the stands and online. In Christian worship, there are no spectators. Similarly, you can watch a meal being prepared and eaten online, but you miss out not only the delights in smell and taste, but more importantly, on the important and essential benefits of nutrition. Agreed, right? So food, sport, watching on TV, just isn't the same, right? It's not the same, and there's no arguments. I'm sorry, I think it's agreed. We're on the same side here. This sacramental dimension is present too in the power and presence of the living Word. My upbringing was in Kirk, where the Bible would be processed in and placed in the pulpit. This was more than theatre alone. It was God coming among us to feed and teach us in the rite where the Word would be broken, read, praised, taught, sung and prayed. And we would each and all be changed by its energy and power in our physical gathering, and so be blessed by God and be sent out. I throw up my hands in agreement. Liturgy, therefore, is the divine drama where the fourth wall is broken, and we all become the players in God's salvation drama. It works on so many levels, but in essence we enter holy time and space, where human power and distance dissolve. Now, it's worth going just back to that little anecdote that I started, saying that one of our congregation had a real issue, a valid issue, with being asked to keep an eye on the iPad. And had I have had forethought, had I have only I'm only filled with regret based on the effect of what happened to him on that Sunday, and how I ruined his time in church, and that wasn't my intention. It really wasn't. So agreed. Completely agree, of course. Liturgy, therefore, is the divine drama where the fourth wall, well, we've done that. The Eucharist is an even more intimate meeting place where altar and table open us to the sacrifice and meal, where we are changed and commissioned, fed physically, intellectually and spiritually, that we might be restored to live in the risen life of the crucified Christ in the world to which we return. Agreed. And it's not reluctantly agreed, it's completely agreed. There's no other debate point to justify online worship over and above church-based real-world worship. Worship is unique in uniting immanence and transcendence. God is with us, among us and in us, and yet takes us out of ourselves, beyond our self-awareness, into the realms of heaven itself. As Charles Wesley wrote in one of his great hymns, changed from glory into glory, till in heaven we take our place, till we cast our crowns before thee, lost in wonder, love and praise. Yes. As in heaven, so in this life, in worship, we have to lose ourselves and enter beyond the veil. There can be nothing virtual in that. So, look, I think it's a really powerful article. And as we've gone through it, I hope I've been very, very clear that I agree with the letter and spirit of it completely. There is a mitigating argument, which is we are where we are. And that argument, although it's not sufficient, I can't stand it when people say we are where we are, but it's completely apt here and now. While we have COVID the way we have it, while we have lockdown the way we have it, while we have only the rule of 5, which we have here in Thailand, the iPad has to stay. Right? It's horrendous, but it's true. And I think as somebody who's got some level of responsibility within the chapel, I need to just crack on and do that myself. That's it. So, and if there's somebody who comes along and says, do you want a hand doing that? Fine. But if not, then leave them alone. Let them worship, and because that's what they're there for. That's what we're all there for, and that's it. So agreed. Now, a cartoon's funny, isn't it? So we've got somebody saying to the organist there, "Have you got the app?" And the organist is saying, "Don't know that one." That's quite funny. Anyway, look, we've read that. It's very relevant to us now. It's food for thought. Going forwards, who knows what the future brings? 2 years ago, who would have predicted where we are now? Nobody. So with the merit of hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, who knows where we will be in 2 years' time? It's who knows? All we can do is do what we do and take it a week at a time. Well, that's my conclusion for that. I think what we will do now is come back, meanwhile back in the ranch, as they used to say on Lassie. And I really like that phrase. And I remember once, many years ago, I had to do a bit of training within the homeless charity I was working with. And it was training related to neuro-linguistic programming, which, back in the day was all a bit of a fad. It turned out to be a fad. Everyone told us it was the future. I suppose a bit like streaming. So we had this trainer come down to teach everyone a bit of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And we would break out into little groups and do our bits and pieces. And then after that, the trainer would routinely say, clapping his hands, "Meanwhile, back at the ranch," and that was his way of saying, "Come back into the room, come and congregate and take part in the training." And I picked it up from him. So, can I remember his name? No, I can't. But I know he's a friend of friend of mine called Mick, an old colleague of mine from many, many years ago. Now, what we are doing, let's have a look at the agenda. We're looking at John Pritchard's book first, and then after John Pritchard's book, we will be looking at the Dan Kimball book. So, John Pritchard's book, The Life and Work of a Priest. We're still I think we're in the second chapter, aren't we? We're in the second chapter. It's part 1, but it's strange because we've got chapter 1, and then after chapter 1, later on, it says part 1. So, don't know where we are. We are on page 13, that's all that matters, and we are starting where it says, "Worship relates to the gathered people of God." So this is very relevant. I love it when that happens. So, if worship is first and foremost directed towards God, it relates second to the gathered people of God. The priest has the prime responsibility of presiding at an event that should help regular worshippers experience the healing, realignment of self that good worship provides. Worship is the moment when we're both broken up and repaired at the same time. We're broken open to the majesty and love of God, to the beauty and angst of the world, and to the joyful detail of each other's lives. We're broken out of our self-enclosed private worlds and placed on a bigger map in a larger family. We can't truly encounter the living God and then go back to peeling the potatoes and cutting the lawn as if nothing has happened. At the same time, like a well-used piece of furniture, we're repaired by worship because the nails of our life and faith will often have worked loose during the week and the glue will have come unstuck in places. What worship does is fit us together again. Strength people will articulate the process in many different ways. A crucial and worrying question to ask of our worship, however, is whether people are indeed being led to an encounter with the profound and transforming reality of God. One city-wide study revealed that although there were many reasons why worshippers attended church, only 5 of them believed they'd experienced anything they might call divine presence on the particular Sunday they were interviewed. Moreover, 25% of the sample of people who had stopped attending church gave as one of the main reasons the fact they simply didn't feel they met God in the acts of worship in which they participated. When routine overtakes reality and repetition replaces imagination, then worship is dying. A key question for worship leaders, therefore, is how, without manipulation, people are to be offered a context in which God may touch them and give them life. Another question, of course, is whether people not only meet God, but also whether they meet each other in worship. Although much is made of the communal dimension of worship, there remains the suspicion that for many people, worship is a solitary experience, and community is what happens after, over coffee, and not always even then. Worship is shaped by the community in which it is offered, and priests are those who have the responsibility of helping the worship to represent and express the life of the congregation. There's a strange synergy at work here, and priests are in the middle of it. The priest's competence in ordering worship is a crucial gift, both to and from the people of God. The priest is dealing with their deepest needs and aspirations and helping them to offer the giftedness and complexity of their lives to God. The quality of our worship and the care and imagination we bring to the task is therefore of the utmost significance. Anglicans are both helped and hindered by their service book. Common worship seems to be one sense to do it all, seems in one sense to do it all for you. The liturgy, the different Eucharistic prayers, the seasonal variations, it's all there in clarity and abundance. How shall these bones live? That's where the skill and imagination of the priest is essential. How can the worship be both familiar and fresh each week? How can people be both reassured by the constancy of God and also stretched and surprised by God's originality? How can the worship represent the life of the community before God and allow God to re-present his grace to us? Wise priests remember that they are the presidents or the presiders at worship and not the celebrants. All the people of God celebrate the goodness and the mighty acts of God. The priest has the privilege of presiding at the community celebration. The priest will therefore hopefully recognize the huge resource of the congregation in planning worship. Others will bring not only their complementary views on what helps an act of worship to take wings and fly, but also particular gifts of music or drama, the ability to lead prayer imaginatively, or to communicate with children, and so on. You may even turn up the lighting and soft furnishings expert. Wow. Atmosphere is crucial and can be helped by the arrangement of space, changes in lighting at different points of the service, the imaginative use of symbols, or the rare gift of silence. And I agree with that, absolutely. The service at St. George's is punctuated at times with silence. And I find that incredibly powerful. The ideas begin to flow when a group works together regularly on the whole experience of worship. The priest just needs to be unthreatened and to keep the group on course, shaping the ideas into living worship. And so I'm going to respond to John Pritchard here, because that's all very well if you have enough people. In our little church, especially during the Rule of Five, yes, we engage other folk from the congregation to take part by readings, and certainly even the intercession. We're very, very keen to let other people read that. But there are only so many people. There's not a lot. Under normal circumstances, there's more we can do. Of course, there's always more. There's always more. And we're talking often, about big plans for the future when we have more bums on seats. But right now, we don't. That's the nature of it. This city, because of COVID, has emptied. It's quite shocking. Now, let's turn now to how not to read the Bible. Now, I need to tell you that it's 11:30 here, and I started work this morning at 7:30, and I'm beginning to feel it. So I think what we might do, and I know it's on the agenda, and I feel bad about it, and I feel sorry, and I'll apologise to Father Tom, but I think we might knock Tillich on the head. Tillich's there in brackets at the end of the agenda. For this reason alone, I don't mind doing Tillich if I'm feeling up to it, but actually it's a bit of a tough slog, and it's getting late. And so what I'm going to do is we'll read a bit of Dan Kimball, have a bit of a chat about him, and I think we might draw this stream then to a close. Okay? Now, let's have a look at where we were. We've done about underwear, we did about women, and did I do that one? I don't think I did. So let's start here. If I did it, we're going to read it twice. We're starting on page 4 of the Prelude, and it says, and by the way, this is How Not to Read the Bible by Dan Kimball. Okay. So, connecting with the deconverted and deconstructing. Searching online, he not only found other people raising questions about these disturbing Bible verses, he also discovered others like him, former Christians who had left their faith. Many had been raised in a church, but after taking a closer look at their Bibles, they discovered things they had never been taught. For instance, one young woman on Twitter writes, I read the Bible cover to cover twice in my youth. I remember encountering verses that made me uncomfortable, but I dismissed them. I started reading it again last year. I got to the 6th chapter in Genesis before dropping my head and crying. The God I believed in was a monster. Finding this community and hearing stories that reflected his own experience contributed to his growing loss of confidence in the Christian faith in which he had been brought up. He found he could no longer believe in salvation through Jesus because the Jesus he had been taught about was in a Bible he could no longer trust. Pastors and church leaders regularly encourage us to read our Bibles, but here is the great irony. It was reading the Bible that caused this student, and an increasing number of others like him today, to leave Christianity. So, the next section is called, "It's Not Only Christians Who Notice This." But the problem goes further than Christians leaving the faith in which they were raised. The Bible is a stumbling block for many non-Christians as well. The strange and disturbing verses they read prevent them from taking the Bible seriously. One Sunday morning, after I had finished teaching at our church, I stopped by a room where people go when they need prayer. A young woman came up to me, and I could tell she was upset. This isn't all that unusual, since people going through tough times and dealing with difficult issues often come to this room for prayer. But as I listened to her, I realized hers wasn't the typical prayer needed. She didn't have a loved one with cancer or relational breakup. She wasn't losing her job. She wanted prayer to help her understand what she was reading in the Bible. She told me she was exploring Christianity and had been coming to the Sunday worship gatherings for a couple of months. A few weeks ago, she decided to read the Bible for herself, but as she began reading in Genesis, she grew discouraged and found her excitement about Christianity sinking. What was it that disturbed her? She shared how right there on page 1, the Bible seems to suggest that the earth was made in only 6 days. She had been taught her whole life in science classes and by the media that the universe is billions of years old. Then, quite unexpectedly, she read on page 3 about a talking snake. She was shocked, thinking this was a fictional story, something like the Jungle Book. Farther along, she read about people living to be well over 900 years old. She also read how the animals of the world followed Noah into a boat like he was a fantastical Dr. Dolittle. But much worse, because God then killed thousands and thousands of people in a destructive flood, including children. She read about Abraham being told by his wife to have an affair so that they could have a baby. She read about the woman turned into a pillar of salt by God. She read about God telling Abraham to kill his young son as a sacrifice. She was visibly upset as she described all of this and told me she had to stop reading the Bible at this point, fearful of what else she would find in its pages. After all, this was only the first half of the first book of the Bible. She told me how she had initially been excited about exploring faith in Jesus. In the teachings at church, she had heard about grace and forgiveness and was drawn to Jesus because of what she had heard about him. But she had no idea, no warning at all, that these disturbing and crazy ideas were also in the Christian Bible. Apologetically, she admitted that she wondered whether Christianity was a cult because she could not understand how thinking people could believe what she was reading to be true. How could they take all of this seriously? This young woman's interest in exploring faith in Jesus came to an abrupt halt after she began reading the Bible. A vast number of people aren't exploring Christianity and will never make it to reading a Bible like this young woman did. They see only clever online memes with Bible verses about slavery or women being told to be silent. and talking snakes and won't likely ever take the Bible seriously or explore the Christian faith. The next section is called Bloody Big Toes, a Sneezing Dead Boy, and End Times Battle Maps. I assume you're reading this book because you saw the title, and like the young people I mentioned, have questions about some of the crazy things you've heard about or read in the Bible. You might be a Christian and find you are growing more uncomfortable as you become aware of Bible verses and stories you never paid much attention to before. And you might be wondering, how do thinking people understand and believe the weird and disturbing things found in the Bible? You might be reading this because you have a friend or family member who is doubting and even deconstructing their faith. They may have similar questions, and you're reading this hoping for insight or a way to respond. Or you might be reading this because you're not a Christian, but are beginning to explore Jesus' teachings on what the Bible says. You may be wondering whether the Bible is credible, or whether the Christian faith is built on historical facts or mythology, and why the Bible contains so much of the violence of the primitive people who wrote it. I can totally relate to anyone who thinks the Bible is strange. I agree that it contains some bizarre and even embarrassing things. When I first tried to read the Bible as a teenager, it seemed more like a work of fiction, a book filled with epic battles and angels, stories of demons, and even a real dragon. My Bible had paper with this cool, shiny gold edging, and I placed it on a bookshelf between Bram Stoker's Dracula and J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy. It seemed like a good fit there with my fantasy and horror books. During my college years, when I read and studied the Bible more seriously, I was still disturbed by some of the oddities I found, like the talking serpent and a talking donkey too. At this point, I wasn't just reading the Bible out of curiosity. I was seriously considering the claims of the Christian faith, finding these bizarre things in the Bible, including worship rituals that involved killing animals and putting a dab of the blood on your right earlobe and on the big toe of your right foot, caused me to seriously question whether Christianity was right for me. I wondered, what is this? Do Christians really believe this? I read the instructions God gives for when your house has mould in it, how when the mould gets cleaned out, in order to celebrate your mould-free home, you are to kill a bird and sprinkle the blood of the bird around the house 7 times. I thought that poor little bird didn't cause the mould, so why did God require his people to kill it? It didn't make any sense. There is an incredibly bizarre story of a young boy who died, and then a prophet climbed on top of his body, stretched out on it, and then the dead boy suddenly sneezed 7 times and came back to life. And like many people find when they are first reading the Bible, I was surprised there was so much violence. Even Jesus, whom I tended to think of as a peace-loving Gandhi figure, appeared at times like a warrior in end times military battles. I knew that if the Bible is the foundation of Christianity, a key, even holy, text for Christians, I had to make some sense of these passages. My friends were concerned when they learned I was reading the Bible. There was even an unplanned intervention for me, where they let me know they had concerns that I was abandoning my intelligence and common sense and choosing to believe fables and myths. Ironically, my friends wanted to protect me from reading the Bible because they feared that it would change me in negative ways. They certainly didn't see it as a positive, helpful book to read. And it's fair to say, I've since, over the last year or so, I've spoken to a few of my closest friends. 1 or 2 are atheists, and we've had similar conversations as that described in that book there. And so I can relate to that. It's one of the reasons why we've got this book, because I'm quite keen to engage them in conversation where I have something reasonable, as far as they're concerned, to say. And I think this book will provide some of that, instead of me trying to defend everything in the Bible as fact or God written. I think I want to be able to cherry pick things which are very clearly good intellectual arguments, and if I don't have to defend something which makes no sense, like sprinkling the blood of a bird around your house 7 times because it's mold free, then I won't, and it's that simple. So now, I think that's as far as we're going to get today. I think that was the last reading for today. We'll leave Tillich out of it. Leave Tillich out of it. Come on, what's he done? Now, Friday the 13th today, lucky for some, and we will now go to the dailycommonworship.com, daily.commonworship.com. I'll share that link with you as I always do, and let's go and have a look at today's collect. And here it is. Holy and loving God, you dwell in the human heart and make us partakers of the divine nature in Christ, our great high priest. Help us, who remember your servant, Jeremy Taylor, to put our trust in your heavenly promises and follow a holy life in virtue and true godliness. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And because I hadn't realised that Jeremy Taylor was in there, I think we're going to have a quick look, because he was a cleric in the Church of England who achieved fame as an author during the protectorate of Oliver Cromwell. Ooh. So he would have been tiptoeing a very fine line. Difficult times. Now, so thank you. Actually, what I'll do is I'll share the Wikipedia page for Jeremy Taylor there for anyone who wants to see it. You're very welcome to it, and you can read all about him yourself. So I will say, without further ado, with prayers and best wishes, bye-bye for now.